Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Southall, Orgreave, Stephen Lawrence, Jean-Paul de Menezes, Ian Tomlinson, Plebgate, moments in contemporary policing, isolated events, bad apples, rogue officers, or consequences of a deeper mindset. Following Stephen Lawrence's brutal racist murder, Lord Macpherson found institutional racism throughout the Metropolitan Police. A decade earlier, my research into policing in the city of Liverpool arrived at the same conclusion. A warm spring afternoon in Sheffield. On Hillsborough's terraces, 96 men, women and children lost their lives in densely packed pens, like cattle pens. Hundreds injured, thousands traumatised. The bereaved and survivors expected thorough, impartial investigations of the context and circumstances. But it didn't happen. I co-authored 2 in-depth reports revealing a venue and organisation unfit for purpose, neglect in the duty of care, systemic failures in the investigations and inquests, and widespread review and alteration of police statements. Yet the victims remain vilified by a predominantly hostile media, fed by deceitful police officers, opportunist politicians, and those eager to deflect responsibility. They infected outcomes and soured public consciousness. 2 decades on, in Liverpool's Anglican Cathedral, I delivered the Hillsborough Independent Panel's report to families. 153 findings distilled from nearly 2 million documents, disclosed by over 80 agencies. Our analysis revealed evidence corrupted and institutional deficiencies in police and medical investigations. Families vindicated, survivors exonerated. Within minutes came a prime ministerial public apology for the double injustice endured by families and survivors. It triggered unprecedented investigations into 2,000 officers from approximately 30 forces, extending to all corporate bodies involved. 96 inquest verdicts were quashed. Disturbingly, current police-led Hillsborough investigations have no informed oversight, nor are they supported by independent research. The Home Affairs Committee recently judged the Independent Police Complaints Commission as woefully under-equipped and hamstrung. Public trust in the police has diminished. Effective independent monitoring now has to be secured if that trust is ever to be recovered.
I want to put that to you, Blair. It is the idea of how long that cover-up was sustained and the scale of collusion over it.
I couldn't agree more. I described it in the Times as the worst example of a police cover-up in the Western world in recent history. Hillsborough is a disaster for the police, a dreadful event, and I really praise Phil and his team with the Bishop of Liverpool who did that inquiry. I think there are a number of points in this that we need to consider. The Metropolitan Police accepted the definition of institutional racism and has done a huge amount to deal with it. I personally think there's a number of organisations, including the BBC, which could be easily described as institutionally racist.
Sure, and we can talk, but we're talking about the police today.
We are, and I'm just saying, these bigger organisations will always have a thin underlying line of disaster.
Is that enough, though, to be fair?
No, wait, I haven't finished yet.
I just want to ask with Plebgate too, because there's new developments about that.
There's lots of developments about
There
Plebgate.
seems to be a pushing all the time to get more information.
Well,
the police come across as being very defensive, don't they?
I think the police have moved into a very defensive mindset, and that's actually partially to do with the phone hacking inquiry. It seems to me the police have closed down, and I wish they were being a lot more open. Where we go to, though, is, and I think what Phil has done in that film, quite rightly, is to connect a whole series of apparently unconnected events, but they may not be. And there is definitely room for a view of the police that now needs to be re-examined. I actually wrote a code of ethics for the police 20
but yes,
years ago.
But when did the police get a code of ethics?
Well, they should have had it 20 years ago, but actually the then Conservative Home Secretary turned it down.
Right.
I think one of the issues that Ian is talking about here is absolutely clear, which is how long do you have to wait? I mean, the issue about Hillsborough isn't about the families waiting 20-odd years for justice. The issue is that a whole swathe of senior police officers, of people who were involved in that process throughout that time, were in denial. And that denial was reinforced over and again by Ian's colleagues throughout that period of 20 years. Now that to me is part of the issue. It's not just about how long we wait, it's about having appropriate oversight that comes very quickly to the fore, that actually represents the views of those who are seeking justice and actually delivers, and that's the issue.
Just to pick up that point Ian made about institutional racism in the police, of course, you're absolutely right. Racism is not specific to the police. We still live in a racist society. The point is this: the police are uniquely able to deprive citizens of their liberty. That's why institutional racism becomes such an issue there. Yeah. And if we look, for example, Release, the drugs charity, just did this fascinating look at government statistics. Official government statistics show if you're black, you're nearly half as likely to take drugs as a white person. And yet in London, you are 6 times more likely as a black person to be stopped and searched on suspicion of possession of drugs. If you are found with cannabis on you and you are black, you are 5 times more likely to be charged with that offence than if you're a white person found with cannabis on you. There's only one explanation for that, and that is racism, and that comes a long, long time after Macpherson. It comes a long, long time after the Stephen Lawrence investigation, and we have to address that as a society. Otherwise, it raises fundamental questions about our democracy. Well, I think one of the other issues to do with this is deaths in police custody, and you're far more likely to die as a result of after police contact or in police custody if you're black. And I'll give you one example: Sean Rigg in Brixton. Now, when we talk about the police moving on, what you had there, and it's only thanks to the campaigning efforts of his sister, Marcia Rigg, and the rest of the family that this issue's come to the fore. We had an absolute whitewash of an inquiry, exposing the failings of the IPCC and how toothless it is, how effectively, because it's so dominated by ex-police officers, for example, it doesn't hold the police to account, where you end up in a situation where you can basically have a cover-up involving, as I say, predominantly young black men dying in police custody.
Well, I want to look at some of the changes in policing structure that's supposed to address some of these issues, and we're joined as well by one of the new police commissioners, who is Julia Mulligan, who's a police crime commissioner in North Yorkshire. Thank you very much for coming on. You know, you've heard the concerns, and they seem to be these long-term ones. In your new job, you know, what sense do you get of how things are? Are you optimistic?
I am actually quite optimistic, because I think there's a new generation of chief constables coming forward now who understand that the principle of openness and transparency needs to be embedded in police culture. And we're seeing a new code of ethics being produced by the College of Policing.
20 years after Ian Blair proposed it.
Unless it's embedded properly and implemented.
Well, tell me, how will you do that, Julia?
It's social change that's needed.
Can you tell me briefly, how can you do that? How can you restore public trust?
Well, I agree with a lot of the commentators' discussions around the need for independent investigations. We've got to stop the police investigating themselves, and that's got to be at a local level and at a national level at the IPCC, and that fundamental relationship needs to change. And we're trying to do that as police and crime commissioners, to bring in a more independent scrutiny of police and also of the complaints process itself.
Thank you.
It needs to be independent from top to bottom.
Thank you, Julia. We're hearing this from everyone, Ian.
Yeah,
and what's your view on who should be scrutinising the police and running these investigations?
The first thing to say, I think, is really a lot of this is a matter of political will. The reason that race was the top of the agenda was because Jack Straw was determined after the Macpherson inquiry that it would be. So you've got to keep the pressure on to make that sort of change. In terms of the IPCC, it needs to be strengthened massively, but it also has to get the right people with the right skills, and getting those who aren't police officers in there is actually quite difficult, because the police are the people who know how to investigate things.
All right. I want to look ahead to the solutions then. And I know that David Davis had talked about in California, they've started wearing microphones in some cases, and it's brought down the use of force by police by 2/3. I mean, it's a very specific example, but are those the kind of measures we should be thinking about?
I think you can have specific responses. I mean, one of the things listening to Julia, with all due respect, is over 20 years, 30 years, 40 years even, I've heard that kind of comment that things are improving, things are getting better, and we don't see anything on the ground. There are two issues. At a local level, the oversight of the police, the commissioners, the strengthening of the commissioners, and of course it was notoriously difficult to get people out to vote for that. But that kind of intervention at a local level is important. But on the big cases, there has to be a standing commission of some sort that provides oversight, that provides understanding, that brings that level of independence and interdisciplinarity. You know, it's not that the police can't investigate the police. They're the only people equipped to investigate the police. But you have to have that interdisciplinarity that oversees those investigations.
Okay, Owen.
Well, I mean, we've had so many of these episodes now. I think what we need is so far-reaching. We need effectively something, a public commission, a royal commission, as it would be called, which would be not stuff full of establishment patsies, but would actually call as witnesses many of those who've been affected by these recent scandals. I mean, there's another scandal which is being looked at the moment, which is women who had relationships with undercover police officers with false identities.
Yes,
now,
and we're going into the detail of that, but
no,
briefly,
I mean,
make your point.
It's a matter of public record, and one of those women said she feels she was raped by the state. We talk about phone hacking being intrusive. These are people who had relationships on under false pretences with people who got into their lives, who lived with them, and in one case had a child with them. We need a royal commission which actually looks overall at issues like racism, issues like Hillsborough, issues like Ian Tomlinson, for example, and make sure we change the police. We have an IPCC that can hold them to account and stop these happening ever again.
Just a couple of points. You know, one, we mustn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, every day there are police officers doing extremely brave and marvellous things, and we mustn't just smear them all with this. But certainly I have been calling for a royal commission with others for so long I've almost forgotten it. And it's more than 50 years now since there was a royal commission into the police, and when the Conservatives were coming into power, we were asking them about, can we have a royal commission? They said they haven't got enough time to do it.
Thank you very much. The question you've been voting on in our text and online vote today is, do you trust the police? And here's what you told us. 20% of those of you who voted said yes, you do. And 80% said no, you don't. Now, these aren't scientific polls, it's people who choose to take part. But it's interesting, people feel strongly. I mean, Dave, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I mean, that's a strong point. I think we're taking a poll at a very specific point of time where Plebgate is really prominent. But yeah, I mean, that shows just what needs to be done for the police to regain their trust.
Well, I'll read some of the comments that we've had in from viewers. Amir says, some individual police officers are trustworthy, but the police generally are not. Darla says, confidence has been lost, not only through cases with a high level of publicity, but through small, everyday decisions which show a lack of common sense. Jill says, nothing disgusts me more than police corruption. However, the good guys outnumber the bad guys. Christine says there's good and bad in all walks of life, and the bad are usually the ones at the top. It's a shame the bobbies on the beat are taking all the flack. Owen, your thoughts on the
Well, I think that shows the disconnect at the moment and the endemic lack of distrust that people have at the moment for the police force. But the point to make, it isn't about individual police officers. It's an institutional problem. It's systemic issues. It's to do with culture. And the way we have to address this is have a royal commission where we actually look at all the issues to do with race, to do with undercover police officers, issues like Orgreave during the miners' strike, Hillsborough and so on. Bring all of that together and come up with far-reaching reforms, not least holding them to account, making sure all communities are treated equally, no matter who they are, and taking on a culture of conspiracy.
Mr. Hughes, I think we all, as members of this committee, feel very disturbed by the evidence that we had in the private session. And perhaps the most alarming part of it was the suggestion that one of the witnesses gave to us that she had all this information of these terrible things that were going on, but instead of getting cooperation from the police, she had a veiled threat from the police. I mean, what's your reaction to that?
I'm appalled.
I can understand. Could I? Yeah, I don't put too much pressure. We've had dreadful reports on the Metropolitan Police, Operation Tiberius. I don't know if you're familiar with it, without revealing any of the confidential things it did. it amounts to staggering evidence that there were groups of police working in collusion with criminals to carry out criminal acts, some of them under the cover of the organisation of Freemasons. They couldn't meet in pubs, they couldn't meet in clubs, they couldn't meet, but they were members of the same Masonic lodges. I mean, this is a deeply shocking report. Are you aware of that any time when you were serving as a police constable of groups of policemen working in collusion with criminals?
No, I mean not in terms of personal knowledge of criminals. No.